Yeah. Play out. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know, I'm sorry. Yeah, they would get caught like crunch. Help. Just. That's probably. I was told that you're right.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We're waiting for a few more chairs. And you would think that Ingrid would be surprised that she would fill the auditorium. So thank you for being here on such a beautiful day. We're just going to get started here. I'm just going to introduce Reverend Linda Finley from Center for Spiritual Living Eugene. She's actually my mentor minister. I don't know if you probably don't know, but I studied to be a minister as well as an exhibit designer, so I have two jobs. But Linda is my mentor, and she very kindly agreed to preside over Mom's Memorial today. So,
and she actually has 3 jobs because she's also a musician and a really good friend to a whole lot of people. I'm going to start with a reading called The Ship. I'm standing at the seashore, and a ship at my side spreads her white sails to the morning breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She's an object of beauty and strength as I stand and watch her until at length she's only a speck of white cloud just where the sea and sky meet and mingle with each other. And then someone at my side exclaims, "There, she's gone." Gone where? Gone from my sight, that's all. She is just as large in hull and mast and spar as she was when she left my side, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to the place of her destination. Her diminished size is in me, not her. And just at that moment, when someone at my side says, "She's gone," there are other eyes watching for her coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout. "There she comes!" And that is dying. Just as a bend at the river does not mean that the river ceases flowing beyond what we can see, so we realize that life does not begin with a person's arrival on earth, nor end when departing from it. Life is a continuum, And in this time of celebration of life, we honor the ongoing of a soul while remembering her experience of learning and growing in this human existence. We are here today to honor Ingrid Weatherhead for the role she played in our lives and to celebrate her life here on this planet. The fact that you are here is a profound tribute to Ingrid, a testimony to the way she lived her life, the gifts she brought to each of you. Each of us is here today because in some way, great or small, for some length of time, short or long, Ingrid Weatherhead brought something of value into our lives. Something good happened to every person here because you know Ingrid. She is part of your life experience. I'm not really saying that she lives on in memory, although that's true. I'm saying there is something much more than that. She lives on as a part of you, finding expression in some part of your life, your thoughts, your actions. By now, it's probably so much a part of your own good nature that you would have to pause and search, perhaps very deeply, to remind yourself where it came from. When people leave us, the essence of who they are always remains in our hearts. Knowing that this memory is one of inspiration, of joy, and of peace, let us join in this tribute, not with the sense of irretrievable loss, but knowing that out of this experience comes something very precious, something that will be to all here today a guiding star and a promise. And so we celebrate Ingrid's expression of life as she moves on to the next experience. And we honor her by honoring the life in this world that is left to us. Let today serve to remind us that life is to be lived. Life is to be celebrated. And we are here to celebrate Ingrid's expression of life. I'm going to do my best to pronounce this correctly. Ingrid Antonie Lien was born on Easter Sunday, April 18, 1925 in Bergen, Norway, and made her transition just before her birthday on April 12th in Eugene, Oregon. A gravestone lists 2 dates, usually with a dash in between. Those dashes, those dates are only single moments in time. They're bookends to our life. It is in the dash between the 2 dates that everything we hoped for and dreamed is lived out. And it's that dash that represents all the time she spent here on Earth. We are here to celebrate that dash for Ingrid. Ingrid was the youngest of 6 children of Andreas and Olga Lien. She married Kingsley Weatherhead in 1952, and they had 3 children, Lynn Kristen, Leslie Richard, and Andrea Catherine Weatherhead. She is preceded in death by her parents, her siblings, her son, and her husband. This is just basically a genealogy of sorts, and it doesn't tell us much about the person that Ingrid was and how she chose to live out her dash. And I'd like to share with you some of what her family wanted you to remember about her. Growing up in Norway as World War II was forming created an interesting background for Ingrid. She was a member of the Girl Scouts, where she was the best ski jumper, according to her peers, who continued to reunite over 50 years later. And the Methodist Church, Central Kirken, where she met many of her closest and longest held friends. During World War II, her city was occupied by the Nazis for 5 years. And as a 14-year-old, she worked for the Norwegian underground by listening to the BBC News in the church basement from a radio the ministers secretly had not surrendered. She transcribed the news and delivered it to underground workers by bicycles, riding around Bergen at night, a dawn-threatening little girl on a bike with a rucksack. Also on that radio in the basement of the church, she heard sermons from Leslie D. Weatherhead, a world-renowned minister from Great Britain, who lifted the spirits of many during World War II with his inspiring messages of hope. Later in her life, she would marry Kingsley, the son of that minister. 8,000 miles away at the University of Puget Sound, pardon me, she would meet him 8,000 miles away at the University of Puget Sound, where she had won a scholarship. When they met, she already knew who he was, for he had occupied a space in a scrapbook she created of handsome ministers. Her Lutheran parents would not allow her to see the movies, let alone create the kind of scrapbook of handsome movie stars that her peers swooned over. She survived, as a young adult, she survived an explosion at her workplace, which forever compromised her hearing in one ear. Writing later about the experience of the explosion, Ingrid said, "This experience had a great impact on me. It made me feel really mortal. I can honestly say that I have tried to live my life as if each day was my last one, thus never leaving anything unsettled with my relatives or friends." Her father was incredibly musically inclined and actually worked building and repairing custom violins and other musical instruments, including full-size type reed organs. Being around musical instruments and her father's talents, she inspired a love of music. The hearing loss that occurred in the explosion didn't stop her from teaching herself to play violin, mandolin, guitar, and piano. She could play just about any instrument she picked up and was an immediate harmonizer in any sing-along. All during life, Ingrid felt a deeply religious call and at one point decided to go to Africa to teach children there. In order to do so, she needed to return to school, so she began night studies at the University of Oslo, while she worked days at the rebuilt factory that she had worked at. It was when I was at the university, still working at the Bergen Steamship Company, that I saw an advertisement about a scholarship being available at the College of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, USA. Somehow I had the idea that Tacoma was near Washington, D.C., and that my only worry would therefore be to get just enough money to travel to D.C. I decided to apply for the scholarship, and to my amazement, I got it. Now I had to quit my job, but how was I to get the money to get there? She shared what was going on with her boss, and the corporation gave her full passage across the continent and to Montreal on one of their ships. Things like that kept happening. My daughter lives there. My sister lives there. So she was met by friendly faces and free places to stay in Montreal and New York City before she began her cross-country Greyhound bus trip to Tacoma, Washington. She knew very little English. I'm going off script here for a moment, but I wanted to share something. When she was traveling on the bus, she heard somebody order, "A ham and cheese on rye, please." And so she had no idea what it was, but whenever they went to stop the bus stop for them to eat, she would go, "A ham and cheese on rye, please." That's what she ate all the way across the country. Once in Tacoma, Ingrid majored in English and minored in music, getting a BA with honors in 1950 and eventually a master's degree in philosophy in 1951. There, she finally managed to meet Kingsley Weatherhead, the absolute love of her life. She and Kingsley married in Bexhill-on-the-Sea in Leslie D. Weatherhead's garden in 1952. And then Ingrid and Kingsley both taught at the University of Oregon. And in Eugene, they raised their children. They spent the rest of their years enjoying Eugene and their cabin on a lake near the coast while taking trips abroad to visit families in Norway and England. Many of you already know much about the adult life of Ingrid, and we are sharing a few highlights. Ingrid held a long and distinguished career at the University of Oregon. She was recognized nationally for her leading role in saving Scandinavian Studies program, which had, prior to her tenure, been recommended for removal. She also co-founded a community-based support group, Friends of the Scandinavian Studies. Her publications included annotated student edition of Henrik Ibsen's Friend of the People, or Enemy of the People, and articles for professional journals. Ingrid's greatest honor and award came at the end of her teaching career in 1990 when she was presented with the prestigious St. Olaf Medal. This award was established to recognize those who have made outstanding contributions in the promotion of Norwegian language and culture abroad. It was a gala event and a wonderful conclusion to her years of work at the University of Oregon. In addition to her career, she still found time to cook delicious meals, knit intricate Norwegian patterns, play the violin, listen to classical music on her incredible hi-fi stereo, juggle oranges to amuse her grandkids and kids, and travel back and forth to Norway to see her family. After retiring, Ingrid and Kingsley traveled widely, both nationally and internationally. She played violin at the Riverside Chamber Orchestra up until she was over 87 years old. She was a member of the Fortnightly Club, the Tuesdays, and the Sons of Norway. She lived her last years at Cascade Manor here for 12 years, making many friends of both the staff and the residents, and you are testament to that. Ingrid had an internal optimism. She sincerely loved people. She was extremely generous and kind. She had a heartfelt wish to make a positive difference in the many lives she touched during her time on the planet. We will remember her fondly for her nonsensical pet names, the high-pitched tone she used to communicate with dogs, her penchant for subtly breaking into song, her radiant smile, one that lit up the room, and surely was one of the most beautiful in the Northwest. Ingrid is survived by her daughters, Lynn Kirsten Weatherhead and Andrea Weatherhead, daughter-in-law Annalie Weatherhead, grandchildren Inga Weatherhead Freistein, thank you, Emil Weatherhead Freistein, Spencer Weatherhead, Madeline Weatherhead, and grandchildren Joseph, Eilert, and Frida, and Audrey. Missed that one somewhere, thank you. It's with deep love and a sense of personal loss that we say goodbye to Ingrid, a mother, a grandmother, a friend. Though she stepped out of our vision, she still lives in our hearts. When we're experiencing letting go of a loved one, there's very little anyone can say or do to alleviate our sense of loss or grief. But know this, as surely as dawn follows the darkness of the night, the sadness and the emptiness will dissipate with the dawning of a new consciousness of the ongoingness of all life. The word death in Aramaic, which is the language that was spoken by Jesus, means not here, present elsewhere. This definition confirms my personal belief that life goes on. God is life, the Alpha and the Omega, with no beginning and no end. As we've been told by the great spiritual teachings, upon bodily death, we are returned to God. For those that are left behind, it's hard to think of anything good in death. But the truth of Ingrid and each of us is that we are birthless, deathless, and changeless. Each one of us is a spirit that chose to play here in this time and space experience for a while. And then when it's time, we go home. Just as a caterpillar builds a cocoon and dies, that it might emerge as a butterfly, with death, we too are born to new life. We humans are great celebrators of cycles, birthdays, anniversaries, and so forth. Today's a sad day. But it's also one of the greatest celebrations for Ingrid, the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next. Each of you has unique memories of Ingrid, memories that will help you with your grief. And I know she would like you to help to celebrate your memories with each other. I believe the greatest gift we can give her is gratitude. I would like to give you time to share. Her children and grandchildren and friends are going to be doing some sharing. And so I would like at this time to call up the eldest, Lynn.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Mother would really have loved to be here. She loved people, she loved events, and she loved being the center of attention. When my mother came to Norway, I'm Lynn Weatherhead, I'm the oldest daughter, and I live in Norway, in Bergen, where my mother grew up. And they used to come once a year, she and my father. And the first thing we had to do was say, Mother, come here, sit down, and we get her calendar and we just check off the days. Okay, you can be with us there and there. We had to put her in her social calendar because there was always an extra sewing meeting or an extra church meeting or an extra choir meeting that she had participated in earlier. If I were to describe my mother in few words, I would say that she's very caring, positive, loved music, as I already said, and she loved teaching and she loved learning. My mother would often tell us how unselfish her own mother was and how her own mother always thought of others. And that's how my mother was. She was very unselfish and genuinely nice. And there was no limit to how she tried to make others feel good, cared about, and happy. I remember coming home from school once, she was on the telephone in the kitchen and she was saying, okay, well, make sure you drink a lot of water and make some soup, that'll help. And I said, what was that all about? Well, it was one of your father's students, he's sick and he couldn't come to the lecture. So, you know, Lynn, these students, they're here on their own and there's somebody else to care for them. And that was my mother. And, you know, she was always expressing herself too. You know, she always used to tell, and especially now in the older days, she would look at Andrea and me and she would say, I love you so much. And don't forget that when I die. She always had a very, very positive way of looking at things. She was very focused on a solution, not on the negative, but we can work this out. And her way of she had no, in her vocabulary, there was no such thing as I can't, and there was no such thing as if. It was always how and when. And when I went to Norway, when I was given a graduation present, a friend of mine whose parents were Norwegian, who I went to South with, we went, Lillian Bong, in case somebody should know her. We went to Norway together, and when we were there, Lillian was going to stay the next year and go to a boarding school, which is called Folkehøyskole, where you can go and either take subjects you want, and it's very, like 17 and 18-year-olds go there. And I decided then and there that I wanted to go to this school with my friend Lillian. So I called my mother from Norway into the United States and said, I really would like to go to this school. It sounds really cool. I want to do this. And my mother said, her first reaction was, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to pack your winter clothing? Well, didn't want any more women. They wanted young men because the school had too many women. So my mother said, well, just come home, go to school here a year, and if you still want to do this, you can apply again. And maybe you can apply a little further, because this was up in the north of Norway where my friend was going. Maybe you can apply a little further south so you're near your relatives. And I did, and I went there, and I'm still there. So I'm trying to keep to my manuscript here. Another very positive thing with my mother is that you could just do the smallest thing for her, and she would show an enormous amount of appreciation. Yeah. So, but then I also have a point here that she was always positive, always happy. But there was one thing, there were some things, and if she did not like something, she would tell you. And one thing, if, in her later years, if people started talking about my mother and she was present and they talked over her head, she would say, "I'm here, talk to me." So as mentioned earlier, she loved music, all the time. She just loved it. And we would have sing-alongs in the car, and she had great ambition on my behalf. Well, I started out with a violin. I ended up playing piano, and she would stand in the kitchen, she would clap the rhythm, and she would say, "You will thank me for this, Lynn. One day you will thank me." And I have thanked her. I thanked her. I've learned to. I can read. I can read notes. But then she said, "Lynn, listen to the rhythm. You sound like you're playing a typewriter." But anyway, and the other thing for learning and teaching, my mother was a born teacher. She loved explaining. She loved teaching. In our house, there was no such thing as a yes and no question. You would get a lecture. So I had to time things because I knew I'd never get out of there with just a yes or no, because she had to give me the whole explanation, and this became a family joke thing. She loved playing Scrabble. In the end, with my mother and I played a lot of Scrabble together. And she got so exasperated with me because I would put down a word and she'd say, "Is that a word?" I went, "Yes, mother, that's a word." "Well, what does it mean?" I said, "I don't know. It's a word. And I use it all the time." "Yeah, but I need to." And we always had to get the dictionary to find out what it meant. So that was her. And I had my mother actually as a teacher at the university. I went about 1 year to the University of Oregon and had her as a Norwegian teacher. And she was really good. She was a good teacher. That's something I learned. I could go on with lots of stories, but I have some words that my two children, I have two boys, and they got together and wrote a remembrance to their grandmother. And this is the greeting from Ingrid and Antonie. "We remember how good a cook you were. Fried chicken with pecan, green beans, and tater tots. We had to search the stores for pecan. They're common in Norway now, but not in the 90s. And it had to be pecan to make the recipe correct. You insisted upon that, and the meal was delicious. We remember how interested in music you were. My parents had an apartment, and near the apartment there was a house that began to burn not too far from their apartment, and everyone was watching the fire department putting out the fire and very excited how this was going to work out. Well, my mother was listening to a concert of Edvard Grieg on the radio, but not concerned about the fire at all. So, and then they write, "We remember how fair you were. If one of us had a birthday, the other one was also given attention. And you were always very generous. For us, the Christmas presents didn't come from the North Pole. They came in a huge brown postal package with lots and lots of stamps from the USA. My mother, you were interested in keeping in touch with us. We have cassettes where you sent birthday and Christmas greetings to us when we were younger. When the internet came, you learned quickly to use email so that you could keep in touch with us. And it was easier for you to stay in touch with us in Norway. Rest in peace, Momo. My children called her Momo, which means mother's mother in Norwegian. Rest in peace, Momo. We'll miss you. And then I would also like to share a very nice card I received from my cousin in England, who also writes about being her niece. It was my
father's sister's daughter. Dear Lynn, I'm so sorry to hear the sad news about your mom. Auntie Ingrid has always, this is dark, been a special person in my life. I admired her as a great role model. She was always warm, encouraging, and loving. Both of your parents were wonderful people whom I felt connected to throughout my life. It was such a wonderful experience for us when we traveled to Oregon in 2003. Our welcome there was fantastic and will remain a lasting happy memory to enjoy forever. We had brilliant communication with your mom and dad, especially when we had emails to help us keep in touch. Auntie Ingrid was interested in our lives and she made us feel loved. I will always remember her as a beautiful person whom I love very much, and she holds a special place in my heart. At the very end, I would just like to say that my mother missed my father immensely. And when I came and visited her, she was talking in her sleep and she was talking Norwegian. And she would pray to God to come get her. And she would ask God, what can I do so that you'll come and get me? And now she's gone. And I just want to thank her. Thank you, my dear mother, for everything you've done and given to me. And if I can have a sense of caring and positivity, I'll be happy. Rest in peace, Ingrid. Ingrid, Antonie. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. And Kristen, that was so beautiful. And I hope you're all enjoying the photos that are being shown today. I'm Annalie Weatherhead. I am Ingrid's daughter-in-law, married to her son, Leslie, who had joined his father 7 years ago. But I'm here today to tell you just a few little anecdotes. My mother-in-law, Ingrid, was the first true Norwegian that I had ever met. Just try and sync that because I come from the islands. I remember the day clearly as I was really anxious about meeting both of them, meeting Les's parents for the first time. And we met at a very clean, unimposing motel right on Highway 101 in Florence. And we were to plan a week-long sailing trip through the Puget Sound. So you can imagine me coming from, 8,000 miles away, Guam, and I was very nervous. It was a month of a lot of firsts. Meeting the parents, sailing on a boat in open water, first time crabbing, and absolutely the first time I stepped foot on the mainland. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I think my anxiety level was exquisitely 11 the entire time. In my mind, both Kingsley and Ingrid were just happy their only son agreed to be with them for a whole week. And I was coming along for the ride. But I was wrong. Ingrid and Kingsley could not have been more welcoming and curious, asking meaningful questions. She wanted to know all about me, even as I was throwing up on the side of the boat. As I look back at the last 40 years of family, you can see here also Ingrid in Spokane helping to take care of the newborns, the holiday visits to Eugene that became weekend stays during duck football season, to the relished adult conversations with really interesting people. Many of you, I'm sure, were there
at one of the gatherings at their Fairmount Boulevard cocktail parties. Whereas host, Ingrid made you feel like you were the most important person in the room in that moment. And from the births of her 5 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren to the subsequent deaths of the 2 men she most loved, our entire family comes together today in person and certainly around the world through Zoom in gratitude for the gifts she gave and the gifts she modeled for all of us. Ingrid often moved behind the scenes, not one to upstage anyone, least of all Kingsley. She was wise, gracious, and generous. She modeled for me the importance of listening, empathy, and grace in helping us see solutions that maybe were always right in front of us. She shined the light on the obvious and not so obvious. I learned that being wise meant you didn't always have to have the right answer or any answer at all. Being wise meant being an equally good listener, which she certainly was. Traits I've noticed in my own 2 daughters and son, Ingrid's genes ever present in the Toronto Weatherhead bloodline. Our family is a beautiful blend of cultures, a courtship of nations and languages, foods and traditions, British, Scottish, Norwegian, Filipino. And if you go way, way back to the 9th century, I would even venture Viking. I know from Ingrid and from my own mother of the enduring strength it must have taken to immigrate, to pack up her bags, leave her family and friends, accept a scholarship, pursue an education in America, and somehow through divine intervention and lots of good luck, follow a compass that led her to find the love of her life. We should all be so lucky to be with the person we were meant to be with for the rest of our lives. And Ingrid led a long life beyond the norm, but she didn't live a normal life. She got to choose how she was going to spend it with intention, and music everywhere and every place she occupied. Her Volvos, for instance, cars chosen not only for their safety rating, but also, according to Ingrid, their high quality sound systems. Ingrid enriched our lives. To our children, she is Grandma Ingrid, loving, kind, and thoughtful. She never forgot a birthday, a Christmas card, or a short note that simply said, "I'm thinking of you. Can't wait to see you soon." During their last decade together, Ingrid and Kingsley enjoyed going places to birdwatch, as many of you know, identifying birds, noting their calls, their colors, and their migration patterns. Every summer, they would invite one of the children without parents to spend a few days with them, scouting for birds and the nests. With binoculars and little notebooks, they would search quietly through green spaces and grasslands to find birds. And boy, would they be really excited to find an American yellow warbler or a rufous hummingbird flitting through the trees. On the day after Ingrid died, a large red robin stood on our backyard fence post, staring at me through a huge glass window, locking our eyes as it sat there for over a minute. And for me, it seemed like eternity. The bird stared at me and I stared at the bird, and there it was. And there she was, this fleeting interaction in an intimate setting, Ingrid giving me the gift once again like I was the most important person in the world in that. We love you.
You're trying to be here, especially those without chairs. Um, Being the youngest in the family, I usually have to go last at any event where people speak about anything. And so I usually pour my soul into things that are not time or linear. So you'll notice the random order of the slideshow. If there is no time or space in the slideshow, you go from 1928 to 1998 in a seconds flat. We've put some artifacts from her life over here for people to peruse. I do exhibit design. This is not one of my greatest works, actually. So I have compiled sort of a random access set of little points I'd like to make, and I'll try to be brief to keep us on schedule. But I did want to say thank you to the staff at Cascade Manor, not only for just today, they have moved heaven and earth to make a beautiful setting for us. Peter came after hours just on his own to help me make sure the slideshow would work, let me know how to run the room. Tia from catering has been awesome. I had to write to her when I was on a trip to Turkey for the last 2 weeks to get that organized, and she was awesome. But not only just for this event, but for the last 12 years, the staff at Cascade Manor has loved on our mother just infinitely, unconditionally. And she just was so happy when they were in the room. They are her friends. And so those of you who are here, please hear from my heart how grateful I am for the incredible environment you provided for her. It is unmatched. And I know that you all had pet names that she gave you. And when you came in to say goodbye to her when she was leaving the planet, I was so touched because each of you had your own pet name. Ingrid, it's Nicky Picky. It's Nicky Picky. I'm just coming to say goodbye. And then tears streaming. It's Sherry, my dearie, Ingrid. It's Sherry, my dearie. I've come to say I just love you, Ingrid. And they all came in and they all had their nicknames. And Lynn was Pensacola Ratsy or Picky Uni, Kitty Catty. And I was Dreezy Cat. And somehow Les got away with being Mr. Brown. Anyway, so I really am grateful for you indulging us in some of these little stories about her. Lynn talked about how she always saw the possibilities in things. And she brought me up with the idea that I could just do anything I set my mind to. And she would say, you show them, Andy. And I hated it when she said that. But because I didn't like the nickname Andy, and I also didn't really believe that I could do it, you show them, you can do it, you can do anything you put your mind to. And actually it has really sunk in because I take on projects. I have a small business designing museums, and I take on projects that are way huger than I have any business taking on. And I get them done because I hear that. You show them, Andy. She had really high standards, and when I went to school at Roosevelt, they were experimenting with not having any grades or requirements. And so it was a hippie school. We called our teachers by first name, and we wore pants, and we went barefoot in the hallway, and we drew murals. And so we got to make up our own schedules. And so a lot of kids had macrame, pinochle, batik and tie-dye, jewelry and enameling. Well, I took those classes too. But I had to have dad and mom sign off on my schedule. So I had algebra, English, French, math, history. And one of the counselors when I was at South Eugene saw that I was studying French and German, advanced placement, along with English and history. And they called mom and said, you know, I think it might be a little too much for her. Maybe she shouldn't have 2 languages. And she said, I studied 4 at her age. So she was, when I was sifting through her photos to create this unedited slideshow, I apologize for the lack of curatorial instinct on this. It's just everything that there is practically. If you're hoping a picture will come around again that you were in, it won't. But most of the cards that I saw when we were sorting through what we should save, and we were trying to get her place wrapped up, and You know, everything was thank you notes for her hospitality. Thank you for the lovely meal that you gave us. Thank you for making me feel better about coming back to Eugene, given my circumstances. I didn't know some of the people who were writing, and so I didn't know the circumstances, but I noticed that she had made them feel comfortable and loved. Thank you from her old aunts for sweaters and nightshirts she'd sent to them. Thank you from the cousins, from the nieces and the grandkids for things that she did. And she tirelessly promoted other people's careers, especially if somebody was being discriminated against in some way. And so she would go, and she was a lobbyist for a lot of different people. She was an amazing hostess. And I think I have so much to say, but I won't go too much longer. I have two more little snippets. One is she encouraged creativity all the time. When we were growing up in Monroe Street, there was a wall on the second story that she devoted to us to draw on. So we took crayons and drew all over the wall. And it may have been to encourage us not to draw on all the other walls in the house. But when they wanted to rent the house out, they had a really hard time painting over the crayon. The orange crayon kept coming through all the time. So, but that was really wonderful. And, you know, when we were at the grocery store, when I was little, I was really disappointed because she wouldn't buy me a coloring book that I really wanted. It was from Lady and the Tramp, and I'd been listening to the record of Lady and the Tramp. I hadn't even seen the movie, but she had gotten us the record. And I really wanted the coloring book, and I was quite upset that I couldn't have it. And then she told me after, she told me to just calm down, you know, and get past the cashier. I don't want you drawing within someone else's lines. She loved music, as we referred to. She gave me a gift of piano lessons when I was 4. She encouraged me to learn violin at 9. She let me learn the flute. I really wanted to play saxophone, but they wouldn't let a girl play saxophone, so they said learn the flute because it's the same fingering. Hope those days are over now. She gave me my own guitar so that I didn't borrow lessons, because you would get really mad at me because it wasn't borrowing. I just took it without asking. And she would teach basic chords to some Norwegian folk songs that we would sing together. Lynn and Mom and I would sing a 3-part harmony. Later in life, she would come and see me play in a band. I taught myself guitar, and I started playing electric guitar, and there she was beaming in the audience, and she'd come to some of my gigs, and Dad would just be cringing at the loud electric guitar solos, and Mom was like, right? She had dreams of me being a concert pianist. I was supposed to perform Grieg's concerto in A minor with the Bergen Symphony. That's what she had in mind for me. And alas, I performed it only for Mrs. Bittner's piano recitals. But I often performed for guests when they visited our house, whether they wanted it or not. And I saw a New Yorker cartoon the other day that said, there was a picture of a mom sitting on a piano bench with her kid, and she says, keep practicing, and someday you'll be able to play the 2 songs you remember at houses that also have pianos. So, but as we said, she taught herself violin, and she played in an orchestra along with Nellie in the Riverside group. And she used to sit with her eyes closed and listen to me practice, just in dreamy state. There's a few pictures of her doing that. She would blast the classical music, which is why Dad's study was downstairs, way away from it. She had a very fancy hi-fi setup with a Girard turntable and Jensen speakers, and she just loved it. And one of the things that she would do to relate to me was she would listen to the music that I thought was cool. And she would take an interest in that way, which was really wonderful. But then she'd ruin it. She'd listen to the coolest, latest rock song and say, well, you know, that's just Bach's air on the G string done with electric guitars. And that's talking about the wider shade pale by Cream. Or can't you hear that that's Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor? And that was All by Myself by Eric Carmen. John Denver's Annie song was Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 5. And the Beatles song, Because the World is Round, is inverted chords from Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, in case you weren't paying attention. At first, it took the wind out of my sails, because I always thought it was really, she was taking the wind out of my sails, but afterwards, it was such a great way to have ear training and classical music training in an accessible way for me. So I have so much, and I'm not going to say it all, because I want us to not indulge you too far without giving more people a chance to share. But one of the men mentioned how much she told us that she loved us. And so I'll close with the way she greeted me every morning for the past 2 years, I would say. I would come in very early to give her a thyroid pill. We don't even know if it did anything. She's been on it for 16 years. It was the littlest pill you've ever seen. But she'd say, "Good morning. I love you. You are so beautiful. How could I have such a beautiful daughter? You're my minsta barn." That's the youngest child. "I love you so much. Do you know how much I love you? Do you know? I want you to hear me say that now, that I am so grateful to have such a wonderful daughter. I want you to hear it, because when I'm dead, I want you to hear me saying this. You've always made me proud, always. I have been proud of you for your whole life. Even when you were in my womb, I was proud of you. Remember this when I'm dead." And it made me weep every time I heard it, because she was so unconditional in her love. And when we had a spat, or if I was unkind, she would say to me, "Now don't go running through this after we've departed one another. I know you'll regret it, and you mustn't think about it, because I love you." So Mom, you were a fantastic mother, and so many moments with you were so magical and sustaining, full of more love than one could wish for. Words can't express the love and gratitude I feel towards you. I cannot imagine a mother more loving, thoughtful, generous, and kind than you are. Thanks for giving me so much, and for your enormous heart and loving soul. I still remember the first thing you ever taught me, what it feels like to be loved. I love you always. Say hi to Dad. I'm just going to play a short sound file from her niece, the oldest daughter of her favorite brother. And I'm going to try to do it through. This is from Ingrid and Ingrid. Let's see if this works.
My dear Tante Ingrid has passed away. She has always been in my life. My first memories are the Christmas presents from America. They smell different. The tea set I bought as a child, my grandchildren has known. For Greta and Olaf's wedding, I got this wonderful dress, the nicest dress in the neighborhood. It was like a dream. We shared the great interest for music. Tante Ingrid visited Norway many times. One year she was in Bergen. She could welcome her own aunt, Martha, from Copenhagen. There are so many memories of the loving and caring aunt. I'm grateful for all her support and hospitality. She will be missed immensely. Thank you.
That was from Ingrid. Yeah. And now I'm so grateful for Nelly for getting together the string trio just so we can enjoy some of the music we've been talking about that Mom loves so much. And Mom played with Riverside for a while, so I know she's listening.
Ja, go ahead. You know, we'll have, ladies and gentlemen, friends, Ingrid had taught me to speak Norwegian, at the University of Oregon. We met first in 1971, in Friendly Hall, which it turns out was the perfect, I thought at the time, what a funny name for a building to have. And later I tried to convince Ingrid it was Fenton. She says, no, it was friendly. And she walked in this beautiful tan raincoat with an overstuffed briefcase that had seen some miles. And there were over 60 of us crammed into this little tiny classroom on a hot September afternoon. And she looked at her and said, oh my goodness. Because I think the class was supposed to be about 20 students. So the first thing I saw Ingrid do was really make us all feel like it was very important to her that we were there, and that somehow she would find a way to teach all of us Norwegian. And so she did. I think the class eventually winnowed down to a more manageable number, but there she was up in front with the Einar Haugland dictionary and the textbook and taught our way. And she singled me out right away because I spoke Norwegian fluently, having been an exchange student with a funny accent in the South. And she spoke Bergen English, Bergen Norwegian, and wanted everyone to speak with an Eastern accent because that would get us further in life. But she made an exception for me that I could keep on speaking Southern Norwegian. And she said, and if you're going to get anywhere with this, you better learn to write it correctly. And you don't know how to do that yet. So I'm going to teach you. And that was Ingrid. She had visions for those that she cared about. And I was lucky enough to become one of those. And she led us along the way through many years and many students at the University of Oregon. And the words that began in the service today about death and passing brought to mind early in that year, one of Ingrid's students was killed tragically in an accident on the way to the coast. And what I learned later was her beloved Oregon coast. I remember she was deeply, deeply moved by that and could not understand that such a bright light had gone out so early in life. And she sort of helped us all, I think, find our way through that grief. And then learning later about her experiences early, as were mentioned today in wartime Norway, and the profundity that came to her from her experiences there, and in seeing life in its frailty and fragility, that brought that to mind. And I remember that came back to me very strongly, like how wise she was at that time, because I was 19 years old. Maybe not many people had died around this, and she had seen a lot more and more different that. So I was her student for many years, and then we became friends, and I met Kingsley, and then I met Andrea and Les and Lynn, and really became sort of, as many other students did, an extra member of that amazing Weatherhead family. Up on Fairmont Avenue, we served amazing food and amazing bread that Kingsley made, and an amazing fish dish that Ingrid could crank out with her eyes closed. It was glorious. And the way that, just as someone said, made everyone feel that they were the special person in the room at that moment, and you belonged to her, and she would never forget you, and she loved you. Later on, I had the good fortune, I've been looking at all the pictures from the Oregon coast and the place that the Weatherheads have at Lake Woe, and how precious a place that was to you. And you knew you had really made it into the Weatherhead circle when you got the invite down to the cabin at Lake Woe. And it was as a magic a place as anyone could think of. And they loved it in a way that went way deep, I think. And I remember a conversation with Kingsley that Ingrid joined in, that was one of the amazing things about to be here on this coast at the edge of European expanse of civilization, to be in this place where they had grown up in places where hundreds, thousands of years of European history had happened. And they were out here where only a few decades of European-based culture and history had happened, and they had a great appreciation to be in that fresh place where it was green and on the edge. And I know there was, well, I think I'll go with that part, but how profoundly that touched their lives to be at that place and to be able to catch fish and wander amongst trees and bushes that sort of had always been there undisturbed. Later on, they became avid birders, and I learned a lot about that I never knew. And I think that was part of the fascination that they felt with nature and greenery. These two people who had grown up in big cities and in European culture and surroundings. Back to the beach, I came down to help celebrate Ingrid's 90th birthday. And what came back to me as I thought of that is how many times that day we went out to the beach and walked around. I think there was a nephew of hers from Norway that was visiting as well. I saw his picture up here, and Ingrid kept saying, I can't believe I'm 90. I can't believe I'm 90. And then she would say it a little later in the day, I can't believe I'm 90. And as I came here today, I heard Ingrid saying, I can't believe I'm in heaven. And I know she knows that's where she was headed, and I see her there surrounded by piles of gullbrød, which was her favorite Norwegian chocolate. It was covered with marzipan covered with chocolate. And I think that her idea would have to be music and friends and loved ones and piles of gullbrød where there was no shame and no guilt and no calories. She could just indulge. So I say, Kære Ingrid, Professor Fru Weatherhead, thank you very much, tusen takk, for sharing part of your long and glorious life with me and with many of your students, some of whom I see here, including Miss Linda Gunn. Oh, good to see you again. I know how much you loved her too, and how much she loved you, and how much she loved both of you girls. The last time I spent with Ingrid was driving her back from Lake Wollahink back here to Cascade Manor. I bade her farewell at the entrance, and that it was her message of love all the way over. She talked about all the people and all the time she had had on that drive between the coast and Eugene. So that's my last greeting, and a joyful thank you to the family and to you, Ingrid.
I'll try it. I'm truly humbled by all the things that you have said, but I'll give it a good try. I want to first thank you, Andrea and Lynn, for allowing me to speak. As a friend of another Norwegian name, of Ingrid's, I've been friends with her for 6 decades, so I've seen a lot, but never in such detail as you've offered me. When I conjure up images of Ingrid, she's smiling, bright-eyed, eager, and warm. If she had her dark moments, I never witnessed them. She was, to me, the hostess at a dinner party, watching guests enjoy her famous fish dishes, or Kingsley's equally famous sourdough bread. Or she was a guest at faculty cocktail parties. Although she never smoked, to my knowledge, she patiently put up with our bad habits for the sake of a good time. To me, the brightest moments we shared were her welcomes to the cabin at the coast, where she delightedly showed us the view overlooking Wollahink Lake. Kingsley gave her full credit for designing that cabin, and influenced by the ships in her nearby in her native Norway. Our meetings here at Cascade Manors were short but sweet. First one in late September, the first time I saw her after some years of separation. I saw the familiar warm smile, the light of delighted recognition in her eyes. Oh, Maggie Gontran, you used to have dark hair. No longer. Again, in my imagination, I see her students enjoying the same joy at recognition as she watched them master the Norwegian language. Ingrid was a colleague of my husband, Peter, who would attest to her teaching skills. When Ingrid succeeded Astrid Williams teaching Norwegian, enrollment increased.
First, it was the Department of German and Scandinavian, then Germanic languages, then its current Gerscan. I like to think that Ingrid played a large part in that increase that Gerscan represents. I leave you to remember with me the Ingrid I saw, blended with the Ingrid I can only imagine. At work in her classes, at play at the cabin with their children and grandchildren, and finally, working and playing in the violin section of the Riverside.
That was just lovely. So if anyone would like to say anything about Ingrid, we do have a microphone, and it's totally okay if you don't feel like saying anything. Like, there are a lot of people here that she loved very much, and many people who loved her. So we have a microphone if anyone would like to say a few words. I think Nellie wanted to. Would you like to? Madeline's going to be the Phil Donahue.
My name's Nellie Elliker. Oh, is it on? So my name's Nellie. My name's Nellie Elliker, and I'm playing today with Gary Tepfer and Addie Castell. We've all had our various connections with Ingrid over the years, some tangentially, but through chamber music. But what I'd like to say about Ingrid is that when I was first starting my career, and that's when I met your grandma, your mom, I was so busy with starting a career and starting a young family that I'd given up playing the violin for about 20 years. And about 20 years ago, Ingrid said, you know, I know you play the violin or have played it in the past. Why don't you audition for the Riverside Chamber Symphony that Ingrid was playing in? And so I did, and that led to a lot of happy years of playing both with Ingrid and also playing with other fellow musicians. And I'll ever be forever grateful to Ingrid for that kindness, that encouragement. I think you've heard that from several people, and you've all had your own experiences with Ingrid. Kingsley and Ingrid were both poets and music makers, and they were weavers of the community that we all share in. And my fondest wish would be that we carry on in that tradition of kindness to others and caring and building that fabric, making it strong. So thank you.
Any others? You can raise your hand. Oh,
Is it on?
Okay, I'm Christine Ryan, and I moved here at Cascade Manor. So I started here about 2018 as a CNA. And when I walked into the second floor garden room, I saw Ingrid. And I was really happy to see her because I didn't know she lived here, but I had known her since I was in high school, since school with a daughter. And I played violin with her in various chamber orchestras. And we saw each other off and on. I never got invited to the cabin, but I was always acquainted with her, always admired her. And so when I was working here, I just was doing my job, and she'd say to me, I am so lucky to have you. And you're so wonderful. And then somebody said to me, well, she says that to everybody. I said to her one day, I heard you say that to everybody. She said, no, just you. That's special. Anyway, because I've studied a lot of languages, we had that in common. I speak French and German. I wanted her to teach me a little Norwegian, so she did. And this is a phrase I remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Jeg en god pike.
Yeah, right. I believe, yeah. Well, both thank you, Millie, and thank you, Kristen, for that. And obviously, we're holding out on you with food. I know you're here just for the sandwiches. But those will come very soon. I'm just gonna do the closing. Reverend Finley had to leave because she squeezed us into a day that she had several other events. And so I'm just going to read a little poem that she gave me, which I think is quite nice, and then a little short prayer to close it all. And then we'll have the last piece by the string quartet, and then we'll have food and drink. So this is a poem called In the Next Room by Henry Scott Holland. Death is nothing at all. I've only slipped away into the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we are still. Call me by my old familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way which you always used. Put no difference in your tone. Wear no forced air or solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Why should I be out of mind because I'm out of sight? I am but waiting for you, for an interval, somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well. And I invite you now just to join in stillness inside, however you think of prayer, whether it's reaching your higher self, whether it's being still, meditative, however you go beyond where your self resides into something greater. And just know the beloved presence of spirit and how gratefully we acknowledge the gifts that we've both given to and received from Ingrid. Be thankful for the healing of our hearts and the awakening of our souls to the truth that sets us free. We release her now to the highest possible expression of new life and spirit. We celebrate the continuity of life and the continuity of love within us all. Moving serenely into our lives and guided by infinite wisdom and grace, we truly know that all is well. And so it is. Amen. Thank you very much, all three of you, for doing this. Really nice. Thank you. And for everyone, and to all of the people who have visited Mom over the years when she's been living here, to Linda Gunn, to Brenda Bird, to Linda Robertson, to all of you, to the Wixes, all of you who've been so kind to take your time, to Dan, to just come and spend time with her. She loved you all. So now it's time for some refreshments. And feel free to visit the back where there is food and visit and share and look at the old newspaper articles and do whatever you like.